Kelly O'Donnell, NBC's Ali Vitale. She, of course, is on Capitol Hill for us. Joyce Vance, the former U.S. attorney, law professor at the University of Alabama, as well as an MSNBC legal analyst. Kelly, let's get to you right now. Within the last hour, NBC News has obtained these two letters that were sent from the attorney of the former Vice President, Mike Pence, to the National Archives. They detail the discovery of documents in the last week or so. Walk us through what we know and what we're still learning as we speak.
Well, certainly what this indicates is that the former vice president is trying to demonstrate cooperation here through these letters, with his lawyer laying out the timeline and emphasizing the conversations, memorializing phone conversations that he had with officials to find out the proper way of turning over these materials once they were discovered, and to try to make certain that the proper government authorities have them. It also indicates that there was a surprise element of this as well, that once they had done the notification, that the FBI came to the Pence residence at 9:30 p.m. and retrieved some of that material that had been contained in a Pence safe, taking that unexpectedly, this letter indicates, and that there were additional conversations about providing additional boxes of contents that included records going beyond classified materials, but other government records that would be likely copies of official records, according to this letter, so that those could be processed by the National Archives, reviewed, and then materials given back to the former vice president when that review is completed. What these letters really indicate is a timeline for what took place, trying to affirm that the former vice president was not knowingly or trying to keep these records, and that he readily acknowledged that government records of this sensitive nature belong to the government, and then trying to establish through these letters what the proper procedures would be and how to communicate all of that. So by putting it all in these letters, they're trying to sort of lay out the case. How did it happen? When did it happen? Who would be responsible, and so on. In the bigger picture, what this does, of course, Peter, is it tells us all that this issue of those who have the authority to review and work with classified materials apparently have a more difficult time with the retention of them than we have been commonly led to believe. We know about the very complicated issues with former President Trump, who had described those records belonging to him, that he had the ability to personally declassify things by thinking about it. Very separate case. This is much more, at least on its surface, as we're learning these initial things, much more like what we've seen with sitting President Joe Biden, in that records were found. Once identified, there was an immediate outreach to the proper authorities to say, they're here, let's remove them in the proper way. So more similarities on its face, based on what we know at this moment, between the Pence case and the Biden case. What that would mean politically will be determined in the hours and days ahead. It certainly shows that this is a more likely scenario than maybe we had realized. I reached out to the office of former President George W. Bush. They tell me that after 2 terms in office, they are confident that all classified materials from his 2 terms, both classified and government records, those not classified but those belonging to the government, were all given to the National Archives. So we've been doing our outreach to those who would have had that kind of contact with these materials to see what is the state of play. But clearly, boxes that are in people's homes that were moved in transitions can be problematic, and that's part of what is playing out here. What it means politically is a question. What it means for Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and what should happen next is an ongoing question as well. Peter?
Yeah, Kelly, and as you are reporting right now, we're also learning about 4 boxes that were recovered in the home in which some of those documents were found, that were hand-delivered by the former vice president's attorney to the National Archives just yesterday. So the exploration process continues as they try to determine exactly how many documents were there. You talk about the differences legally and politically here. I want to talk about the political angle for a moment with Ali Vitale. And Ali, here's what the former Vice President Mike Pence said in recent weeks about President Biden's handling of classified documents. Take a listen.
The handling of classified materials and the nation's secret is a very serious matter. As a former vice president of the United States, I can speak from personal experience about the attention that ought to be paid to those materials when you're in office and after you leave office. And clearly, that did not take place in this case. But the unequal treatment before the law was deeply troubling to me early this week.
He said clearly they were not taken seriously by President Biden, which is to suggest that they weren't taken sufficiently seriously by him either at this point. This is all notable because it poses a real challenge for those House Republicans now in control of things in the building where you are standing here. The Oversight Committee already vigorously going after any documents and details from this White House. Right now, they face a real unique challenge, as it appears that former Vice President Pence and President Biden handled these scenarios pretty much the same as one another, but very differently than former President Trump.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because at the crux of this has always been the issue of cooperation, in the instance, at least right now it appears, of Pence and Biden, versus obstruction in the case of former President Donald Trump. That's always been a key difference. But look, in just the last few minutes, as this news is making its way around Capitol Hill, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, I think, put the thought out there that all of us have, which is clearly we have a problem here. For him, he wants more answers on how this was able to happen. I think that's certainly the mood when I talk to lawmakers, especially on the Senate side. They are still in the position of trying to just get more information on what's in these documents. They asked for a damage assessment after former President Trump had documents found at Mar-a-Lago. They asked for the same kind of damage assessment after the Biden documents became public. And you have to imagine that in a situation like this, we could see a continuation of that kind of request from the Director of National Intelligence, even though we're just about an hour into this news breaking to us and becoming public. The other thing here is the way House Republicans will handle this. We've seen them, Peter, you're right, really charge at the current president and the current White House, trying to say that they want visitor logs from Wilmington, more information about why and how these documents ended up in his residence and at the Penn Biden Center. There have been ongoing conversations, the golden age of letter writing, if you will, between the White House counsel's office, and of course Capitol Hill, all of these different committees looking to do oversight and investigation of this. Now is a moment, though, we've seen them sort of downplay the desire to do investigating into the Trump case of this, but now is a moment where we'll have the opportunity to ask, as lawmakers come back to town today on the House side, if they're going to be willing to look into the Mike Pence situation with the same fervor that they clearly wanted to look into President Biden.
It certainly dilutes the political issue as it relates to President Biden, given this new information about the former Vice President. Joyce, I want to ask you about the legal issue here. We already have two special counsels, one looking into former President Trump, another looking into President Biden. Does this mean that there's a third special counsel on the way at this point? Because in the words of Merrick Garland previously, these are extraordinary circumstances.
They are extraordinary, and this entire environment is complicated by DOJ's decision to appoint a special counsel for the Joe Biden matter. It looks, in hindsight, it looked at the time like that was done out of concerns over public perception. DOJ wants to be perceived by the public as acting fairly. But the special counsel regulations say that the Attorney General should only appoint a special counsel if it appears that there's a criminal matter to be investigated. And that's at the crux of this matter. At least as far as we know publicly, there's no indication that Biden behaved in any way that was criminal. If you look at the Espionage Act, it typically requires an element of willfulness or at least knowledge. And so far, the Biden team has maintained that Biden had no idea the documents were there. That situation now looks very much like Mike Pence's, and the challenge the Attorney General faces will be treating the Biden and the Pence situations identically. It might seem logical to have one special counsel to investigate those together, but there's a little political twist here, Peter, which is that the special counsel who has been appointed to investigate Biden is a former Republican U.S. attorney. One would think that suggests that Mike Pence should now be investigated by a former Democratic official, perhaps another U.S. attorney. It's likely to get more complicated as this continues.
Yeah, U.S. attorney in Maryland who was appointed by former President Trump, as you speak about Robert Hur and that situation as it relates to President Biden. I want to bring in NBC's Justice and Intelligence correspondent. That, of course, is Ken Delaney, reporting with the latest on this. Ken, it seems like classified documents now, all of a sudden, they're showing up all over the place. This has become fodder for the late-night comedians even. Is this the intelligence community You know, is the intelligence community now really expressing new concerns about the safety of these state secrets?
Absolutely, Peter. The intelligence community and the Justice Department, as evidenced by the fact that in those letters we obtained about the Pence situation, they note that the DOJ basically requested special handling. They took immediate access to these documents rather than having them sent to the National Archives. That's how seriously they're viewing what appears to be an epidemic of classified information being stored in the wrong places. But that said, two things. One, everybody knows that there is massive overclassification in the U.S. government. And when you talk to people who've worked in White Houses, they're not surprised by this at all. And in fact, if you go back in recent history, there are many examples of current and former government officials taking inadvertently or intentionally classified documents home. There was a diplomat based in Pakistan back in 2016 who was investigated by the FBI. They thought she was a spy. She wasn't, but they found classified documents in her home. She was not charged with that because it ended up being just a simple mistake. And then you had Attorney General Alberto Gonzales back in the Bush administration, 2008, who was found to have mishandled the classified documents. He actually took very sensitive notes about NSA programs to his home and stored them in his home, according to an Inspector General report. He was not charged ultimately, but obviously this phenomenon has been with us, but the frequency, the sort of epidemic here, this trend of recent officials having classified documents in their homes suggests we have a big problem on our hands. There is not a good accounting for the nation's secrets, Peter.
Yeah, Ken, a lot of questions that you're raising that are the ones a lot of Americans are asking. I want to bring in former U.S. Attorney Michael Moore as well. Michael, give us a sense, what is the next step in an investigation by the FBI in a case like this? Do they pursue searches? We don't know how many properties the former vice president has. He may not have any others, but do they pursue additional searches? We know they have, the archives at least has 4 additional boxes of documents that they are reviewing at this time.
Well, I'm glad to be with all of you. I do think it's likely that they will maybe do some consent searches. They'll reach an agreement with the former vice president's team to go out and just double check and make sure that there are no other documents there. Look, this is a good lesson. And when you spend your time throwing darts at people, you're likely to get poked yourself. And we do have a problem of overclassification. There's no way these folks could do their jobs and they've got to run to a little secret room somewhere, 1,000 miles away to look at documents. They need access to them. We ought to, and I appreciated Joyce's comments about perception, because I do think that we're dealing maybe in perception as opposed to looking for ways to prevent this and fix it going down the road. And worried about whether or not we're going to have 3 special counsels, and we may at the end of the day. But it's a very different scenario when you look at the Biden situation and the Pence situation, at least what we know now, and the Trump situation. And that is that has not been the repeated request for documents to be returned, that there have not been efforts to obstruct or make statements about whether or not there were other documents existing in the Biden and Pence homes. That's a very different scenario than Mar-a-Lago. Unfortunately, they're now lumped together. It may have very well neutralized the prosecutions in these cases. But we ought to look for a way to be able to move forward, making sure that we have an acceptable way to deal with protecting national security, and at the same time recognizing that people who are in the position of president, vice president, some members of Congress will need access to information too. So it's a big mess politically. From a legal side, I don't see much jeopardy to Pence and Biden, but it may be the department has to play it out to at least appear to be even-handed through the 3 cases.
It certainly does distill the differences between Pence and Biden versus former President Donald Trump here. Just moments ago, by the way, and I hope our panel will stay with us if they can. We just heard from the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who was just notified about the discovery of documents at the private home of former Vice President Mike Pence. And here's part of what Senator Graham said moments ago. Take a listen. Oh, wait, I'm told we don't have the sound, so I'll read it to you. I'll do my best Lindsey Graham impersonation, if you will. He says, what became a political problem, for Republicans is now a national security problem for our country, he adds. And again, these comments are within the last 15 minutes. He says, we need to find out what happened. You've got Trump, you've got Pence, you've got Biden. The only thing I think you'll find in my house is, in his words, a bunch of Chick-fil-A bags on the floor. The bottom line is, I don't know how this happened. We need to get to the bottom of it. I want to go back to Kelly O'Donnell, if I can, very quickly, who covers the White House with me these days. But Kelly, you spend years covering the Hill as well. And classified documents, I mean, this is not something that we have heard about being talked in this sort of loosey-goosey way as they are right now, where they seem to be just showing up all over the place. For the former president, they were showing up after a search, and then they were scattered on the ground by the FBI for their evidentiary pictures to be taking place. For President Biden, they were found in his garage where he parks his Corvette. And now for the former Vice President Mike Pence, who said only a matter of weeks ago that he didn't take any classified documents with him in an interview that he did. Now it's revealed that he did, in fact, have documents with him. This really changes the conversation, as Senator Graham says, to a national security one as much as anything else.
And there's also the issue of just sort of follow the documents. What happens when a president or vice president leaves office? There's a formal government-run transition period for outgoing. We think of transition as the people coming in. Well, there's a formal process going out as well. And so the former vice president, Mike Pence, would have had a transition apparatus that would move his goods and move his personal effects. He, based on a quick search, appeared to purchase this Indiana home several months after leaving office. Of course, he had resided at the official residence of the vice president during his term of office here. Prior to that, his residence was the governor's mansion in Indiana. So he and his wife Karen bought this home. So there was a period of time, a gap between taking possession of their new home and leaving office. So where were these documents and things in the in-between time? Were they in storage? That kind of thing. That'll be one of the questions that'll be assessed here. And then in all of these cases, what are the documents themselves, and do they tell us something about the threat level if they were observed by anyone without classification permission? And does it tell us anything about why these officials might have wanted to retain them if there was knowledge about retention? For example, in former President Trump's case, he willingly talked about wanting to keep the Kim Jong-un letters as a personal souvenir. We don't know the contents of what was in the Biden home specifically. We don't know the contents of what the Pence papers included, what subject matter, what topics, how sensitive are these matters. That plays into this as well. And certainly on Capitol Hill, the typical way we see senators, members of Congress, and staffers who have the ability to interface with this material is they go into what's known as a SCIF, a room where there isn't the penetration of cell phone, electronic surveillance and that kind of thing, and they view documents in a room and they can't take them out. When you are a principal in the level of president and vice president, things are a bit more mobile, and we see how that might be more of a problem here.
Kelly O'Donnell, Ali Vitale, Joyce Vance, we thank all of you. Michael, I hope you'll stay with us for a moment if we can. Another major headline we're watching this day, California mourning multiple mass shootings.